guys, Coach Gaglione here, and this is kind of a first in our kind of, just training through pain series. A couple of things I want to reiterate just off the bat. I know we have the intro, but I just want to kind of harp on a couple of key points. Again, I'm not a doctor. You should never really kind of do anything that's kind of truly painful. But if you're training hard and you're training heavy and you have big goals, you're going to probably have some kind of bumps and bruises along the way. So a couple of things that you always want to kind of keep in mind when you're kind of dealing with any type of kind of discomfort. You want to see if there's a load that you can kind of tolerate. Is there a range of motion you can tolerate? Is there an exercise variation that you can tolerate? So the first thing that we're going to talk about, number one, is just look at your movement quality. So that's going to be the first thing. Now, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but in general, if you have kind of a good spine position, if you have a good brace, you get good spinal mechanics, then a lot of times squatting and deadlifting is going to be not too much of an issue, but there's going to be obviously exceptions to the rule. So the first thing that we're going to kind of look at is the relationship between your rib cage and your pelvis. Okay. So when a lot of us talk about like kind of a neutral spine position, and this goes beyond just pain, but also just kind of getting the most out of the movements as well. So I like to kind of just use this as a visual here. But if I'm in like a nice stacked position with my rib cage and my pelvis kind of stacked on top of each other, that's going to kind of look something like this. If I'm overarching and my ribs kind of start to turn up, my pelvis starts to get anteriorly tilted. That's kind of an open scissor, we call it an open scissor type position. So it's going to really crank a lot of pressure on my lower back, especially versus that stacked position. If I'm too round, if I'm too flexed over, if my pelvis is too posteriorly tilted and my spine is in flexion, that's going to be kind of a closed scissor position. Okay. So kind of understanding the relationship between your rib cage and pelvis, especially when you're trying to engage your upper back, it's going to be, a lot of times some people will start to arch their lower back too much instead of kind of engaging through here. So having some extension in the upper back is going to be okay, but we want to make sure that, again, this rib cage and pelvis position is stacked. So number one is just positioning yourself correctly. That's going to be really important. Then from there, once we're positioned in a good spot, we want to make sure that we're using the muscles in our trunk, the muscles in our hips, and the muscles in our upper back to help kind of stabilize the weight. So all this kind of stems from proper breathing and bracing mechanics, and we have other videos on this as well, but I want to kind of quickly review some things. A couple of things that you might see when people are kind of breathing inefficiently. They're kind of shrugging here, or they're kind of hollowing. So we want to make sure when we brace, when we're doing a good breath, getting a good breath, we want to use our diaphragm effectively. And our diaphragm kind of acts like a balloon. And when we compress it, it's going to expand in all three directions. So a common mistake that people will, like the common cue is, and just kind of going off cues in general, there's no bad cue if it gets the athletes to do what you want. But a cue that can be overdone and misused is kind of the belly, push your belly out cue. If we're just kind of dumping forward, a lot of times our ribs are going to be flared, pointing up toward the ceiling, and we're going to be overextended. So when we're breathing and we're bracing, we want to make sure that we're drawing down, our ribs are down, our ribs stay stacked over our pelvis, and we're expanding not just the front, but the sides and the back as well. So when we're taking a good breath, we want to see our thumbs kind of expand outward that way, but I like to just kind of put my thumbs just above my pelvis and really kind of feel. I would recommend, I'm doing this sitting right now, I'd recommend starting supine on your back, but just a kind of a good way to kind of make sure that you have a good breath. From there, once we kind of get the breathing down by itself, we want to set the brace on top of the breath. They can work hand in hand, but you should be able to do them separately. You should be able to brace without a breath. You should be able to breathe without a brace. When you combine them, that's going to create a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, and that's going to create the most safe position for your spine. I like to transmit more force into the barbell. A couple other things to kind of consider too when we're trying to lock down our lower back and we're trying to like limit lower back pain and discomfort. If we can hold a neutral spine position or just hold our spinal position in general, that's going to be the best. If someone is kind of fixed in extension and they're able to kind of maintain that position, sometimes they may not have any like kind of symptoms or anything like that. Someone might, a round back deadlifter is kind of a good example. If they're a little bit like slumped in their upper back, there may be no issues there. A lot of times when we are dealing with pain or injuries and things like that, it becomes from either a flexion or extension moment. So if I'm really trying to arch hard into it, I'm going from like a neutral position to like a really overextended position, that can be problematic. Or I'm going from a neutral position to a flex position or an extended position to a flex position. There's a moment of flexion or there's a moment of extension. So whatever, you always want to kind of start and finish in the same position. So if I'm setting myself up for a deadlift, I don't want to see, that would be a flexion moment. If I set myself nice and tight off the floor and then I have this flexion moment, or if I'm setting myself in a good position in a squat and I have this flexion moment, or if I have this extension moment and I overextend. So we want to be kind of careful of those things as well. So whatever kind of spine position you elect to do for your squats and deadlifts, you want to try and maintain a rigid position, create a lot of pressure, and hold that position throughout the rep. So other things to consider, and I think for all these videos we'll kind of link to our assessment video. You want to kind of assess your hip and your thoracic spine range of motion. So just in general, and this will be a common theme for all our future videos, if you have some issues or kind of discomfort in one area, you want to look upstream and you want to look downstream. So check out your kind of mobility for your upper back and your hips specifically. So kind of some basic tests that you can kind of do. So like for thoracic spine, you can obviously check your extension, you can check your rotation, things like that. If you're really locked up in your upper back, that's going to cause a problem. Some other things that you want to consider is you want to check like your hip flexion, you want to check your hip rotation, internal and external rotation. So if you're like a wide stance squatter, for example, or if you're a sumo deadlifter, if you don't have a lot of external rotation, that's going to cause some issues. If you're a conventional deadlifter and you don't have a lot of hip flexion, or if you're a narrow stance squatter, you don't have a lot of hip flexion, these things are going to can cause some issues. So some basic tests, again, we've done these before, some basic tests you can do. So we can kind of check our hip flexion and do like hip scour tests. We can check in different ranges of motion. We want to make sure that we can kind of break 90 degrees, obviously for a squat. For the deadlift, we want to look somewhere between 70 and 90 degrees for a conventional deadlifter. I just deadlifted this morning, so I'm a little bit tight myself. And if you do find there's a mobility restriction, obviously you kind of want to work some of those areas. Some really basic stuff that you could do for kind of increasing like hip flexibility, or just kind of like loosening up that area, would be any type of hip flexor stretch. Would be to open up our hip flexors here. We want to keep our ribcage stacked over our pelvis, squeeze, engage our glutes, and get nice and tall. If I want to extend, progress that drill, I can elevate my back foot and do the same thing. So those could be some drills to kind of give you some relief. Other kind of things to consider: if your hip rotators are really tight and you found that you didn't have a lot of external rotation, for example, your piriformis muscle is one of your hip rotator muscles, and it attaches to your spine. So a lot of times people will find some relief by doing some sort of stretches to alleviate that muscle group. So any type of figure 4 stretch can be very helpful. So again, I'm a little bit tight here, so I'm feeling a stretch there. We want to make sure we're not torquing on the knee. I can get nice and tall. I can do this on a table. I can do this on the ground. So this is kind of a good place to start for most people. Again, I want to make sure I'm not putting pressure on my knee and using a range of motion that I can control. I can also, again, do this on the floor. So we can do kind of like our shin box drills, or we could do something more traditional, like pigeon pose here. I can kind of work to the floor and then back up, but again, I want to try and keep as neutral spine as possible. So if I had something a little bit high, this is a little bit low, but if I had something a little bit higher up, I can come here, and I can sink down to the floor as well. Working on some relief for the lower back. Biggest thing is your ribcage and pelvis relationship. We went over breathing and bracing. So those are all technical things. The last time we talked about some mobility stuff, so we'll check out your hip mobility. Maybe add some more hip stretching post-workout or on days where you're not training, just to make sure that that's feeling good. So the next piece would be stability. So we can continue to work on our breathing and bracing. You could also do some things just to kind of give yourself some relief. So any type of planking type drill is going to be really effective to teach the brace. So let's kind of go through a couple really basic ones quickly. And then I'll kind of go over a little bit more breathing stuff that you can use as kind of a warm-up and or just for some relief. So anytime we're doing any type of planking drills, again, we want the ribcage stacked over the pelvis. We want our glutes engaged, abs engaged. We want to get a good diaphragmatic breath. And our upper back is going to be engaged as well. We want to make sure our hips aren't too high, they're not too low, just somewhere in between. And when you do any of these drills, we want to have maximum tension. We want to have intent and purpose with these drills. Side plank, same kind of idea. I really like to implement stuff for the hips as well. So this is a little bit more squatting specific, excuse me. So this would be a side plank with a clamshell. This would be a side plank with hip flexion. So we're working different parts of the lift. Other things for deadlifting specific stuff would be like a leg lower. You could do with a band or without a band. But we're learning to move the hips independent from the spine. So for someone with a lot of lower back issues or tightness, these kind of core activation drills could be used as a warm-up. They could be done on off days. They're going to help give you some relief, and it provides more integrity for the trunk muscles to help alleviate some pressure in the spine. The last thing that's going to be really important is just some like basic 90-90 breathing. Depending on how you do these drills, I could get like a good posterior tilt to give me some relief. I could just breathe normally, getting full exhales just to kind of give some relief. I could reach and round. So this could be something you could do on an off day or after a workout to give yourself some relief in your lower back. So a couple of things I'm trying to do with that drill. I'm not actually trying to get a maximal brace like a lift. I'm really trying to get a full inhale and a full forceful exhale. And I'm posterior tilting my pelvis. So if you have some like extension-based lower back discomfort, that can be very helpful. Learning from you saw the Gorgeous Bowl before, Jill Miller of Yoga Tune-Up, learned a lot from her. Some other things that can really help with like lower back discomfort is your breathing, hanging upside down, and some distraction could be beneficial for some people. You have to, if something does not feel right, obviously just don't do it. But something especially you have to consider. A lot of what we do in powerlifting is very compressive. We always have a bar in our back, so that's one of the reasons why we use something like a Matt Wenning belt squat. It's traction based, so it takes some pressure off the spine. We still get a lot of volume in, so that'd be kind of one way you can modify if you still want to get some squat training in and you're not tolerating compressive load so much. So this is a really great drill you can do. Again, I would not do this before you squat, but do this on an off day, do this after you train. If you want to get some actual relief, and all the other things are in place, this is Donnie Thompson's Super D lower back protocol. So we're going to check that out now. I'm going to show you some ways that you can get some distraction, hang upside down, and just provide you some relief if you're experiencing some issues with compression for the spine. These are Godzilla bands here, and it's going to provide some compression on the low back. And there's a lot of the stuff is just kind of anecdotes. This is from my experience, what's worked for myself and our lifters. It may not work for you, but it's definitely worth a try if you're experiencing some discomfort. I'm going to show you a couple of different positions here. But basically, by hanging upside down and adding some compression to the band, it's going to provide like a tractioning effect. It also is going to allow you to kind of just get a little bit more parasympathetic, allow you to kind of focus on your breathing a little bit more. It's just a good way to kind of cool down after a heavy session. Like I say, cool down. So instead of just being like in a sympathetic state and you're kind of really on overdrive, let's say like for me, like on a heavy day for me, I might be working up to something 700-800 pounds on a squat, for example. So this is a kind of good way for me to kind of decompress after the session. So a lot of the stuff could be more neurological than anything else, but if it provides a good effect for you, I'm going to make sure this is as low as I can on my back. Use the rack. So right now I'm just going to focus on just relaxing and breathing. Trying to relax my shoulders, my traps. I can work different positions here if I want to stretch my hips a little bit. I can posterior tilt my pelvis if I want. I could stretch my hip a little bit if I'd like. I'm just showing you some different positions. You could spend more or less time if you'd like in any position. A lot of times I'll just kind of hang here. And 2 to 5 minutes is fine, just for the sake of time. I'm just going to show you another thing I like to do if I have a little bit more upper back tightness. I can shimmy up a little bit more and just kind of get some traction for the upper back as well. And just hang here as well. Okay. All right, so that's kind of our first in the series. We're just talking about some, like, if you want to kind of alleviate some lower back discomfort. Number one, again, I can't emphasize enough, this is just from my personal experience. This may not work for you. If you have a really serious condition, you should see a doctor, you should see a PT. You can check out clinicalathlete.com if you want to find a PT or doctor in your area, but if you are someone who's a little bit more advanced, and this is just some good things to hopefully get you some relief so you can keep training, keep kind of pushing forward. Again, look at your technique, look up and downstream. So what that means is you can look at your hip mobility, your thoracic spine mobility, make sure your breathing and bracing is on point, make sure your core is really strong. Some other things are going to be important is just make sure your kind of glutes, a lot of times your glutes are doing the hip extending and you're not over using your lower back all the time. So a lot of times people think if they have lower back pain, they may need to train them lower back more often, but a lot of times maybe there's an overuse injury there. So if your glutes and hamstrings get stronger, your core gets stronger, you don't have to use your lower back as much. A lot of times that can be a kind of a good strategy as well, but definitely make sure your technique is on point, find a load that's appropriate, that's going to allow you to be successful, find a range of motion that's going to allow you to be successful, and find a variation of the lifts that are going to allow you to be successful, and then you can kind of get back to your kind of normal training in time. So I hope this video helped you. If it did, please share, please subscribe for future content. Definitely check out the links below so you guys can support the program. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.